Um, I won't be recording the discussion part at the end, just so folks know, but I wanted to record it just so that we could have a conversation. And other people who weren't able to be here can hear and participate in future sessions. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I just want to acknowledge before I begin that I'm on unceded Saminus territory. For me, that means that, I try to cultivate a relationship with the land and also the beings who already live there, both indigenous people and animals, other creatures. Today it's really gray, and I like that because it means it's going to rain, and it hasn't rained here for a long time. So today we're going to be talking about grievances. I wonder, would anyone be willing to come off mic and kind of like, just based on their impressions or based on what they read or experiences that they've had, talk about like what they think administrative grievances mean? And that can be in the prison context or not in the prison context, because there are other situations where you have to go through the same process. Just if anyone wants to raise their hand or go off mic.
Are you talking about like inside, right?
Sure, that's one example that we'll mostly be talking about. Yeah.
Okay, so I can talk about it. Being inside and filing a grievance is a shitty process. I don't care what state you're in. You can get it to who you want to get it to, especially when you're trans and you're black. And you feel like people are holding your destiny, and they really are in that moment for some of these grievances. And it should be made more accessible for people who are inside to really complain and for complaints to be heard. And I just think it's a distress process that a lot of people go through. But specifically being black and trans, I know it was a shitty process for me. And then also I've never, on the flip side of that, with my experience, I've also never been in a lot of spaces long enough to go that. I've been incarcerated in a lot of places, but like 30 days here, 40 days there, 1 week here, 1 week there. That's another thing they do when you're trans. You get moved around the jail a lot, even inside of the jail. I know it's especially with me. That I drew a lot of attention that they didn't like. And yeah, and I was always one of those people that just, I call myself filling out a grievance, but I would also advocate for myself and like act like really boisterous about it. So they would have to deal with me. So I don't know what their process really looks like for other people, but it still was a shitty process, even asking them how to do it. But thank God for some of those allies who will come and bring you paper and pen and like, here, this is who you contact and this is how you do it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jasmine. I think that like makes me think of two things that are really good to start with. The first thing is like, one, even though we're learning about these processes and even though we are participating in them, that doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with them. And I think like in the discussion part in particular, but throughout, I invite y'all to think about like, why doesn't this system work? What's wrong with it? What is designed about it to make it so that people can't get what they need? Because that's intentional. It's not something that happened by accident because of the like mysterious inner workings of bureaucracy. And I think the other thing that I heard you raising, Jasmine, not to put words in your mouth, is like the idea that like people don't know what this process actually looks like. The process is deliberately very confusing. There's a lot of variation from state to state, as we'll be talking about, and it's not accessible to incarcerated folks, and it's totally invisible to folks on the outside unless they try and do a lot of digging to find out what it looks like to actually go through the process of trying to express your needs to, some administrative agency, some government entity. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
We talk about for inside members.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, let me tell you how Jersey and their fuckery is. Um, you already know if you write up any situation. For me, I came any facility I came to, whether even when I was moved to this or that location to be put in solitary confinement, I will always ask for inmate handbook, so I could try to move accordingly to what you say in this booklet to alleviate problems, right? And so I will often write up things. I already knew that I was never expecting anyone else to write a letter on my behalf when it came to other inside people, let alone other officers who weren't attacking or offending officers. I didn't expect them to go against their so-called brethren. I knew I was on my own with it, but I was at least expecting someone to come down and physically talk to me. It was always, no matter what it was, not just for me, anybody else who I've talked to, um, in the LGBT community, and I write these little grievances up. They call them, New Jersey call them remedies. So you get a remedy form and you write it up, write the situation up as detailed as possible with very few lines, but you can also attach paperwork with it. It's always going to be, well, we spoke to officer such and such or staff member such and such, and they're saying that you're inaccurate, that you actually were the aggressor, whatever it may be, or that didn't happen. And that's it. There's never a follow-up. So what I had to do was, like, after my like second time of getting that, I became frustrated. And I had just started saying to myself, just in case they hurt me in this bitch, they already let me get hurt under their watch. Let me start writing, continue to write them up. And when I get, you know how the carbon papers, I think it's the carbon papers. So you get your copy back with, so now I have what I wrote up, the date and time, as well as the response from administration. And it always is not like we don't have warnings in New Jersey. We have in the county jails, yes, but in the DLC, New Jersey, we don't have wardens. We have administrators and then an assistant administrator, which can be shifted around as well. Um, it's usually one of those two, or often the housing lieutenants who usually respond, but it's mainly the higher ups, those two. And when they do, they would sit here and respond. It's always like this. So I started sending them home and sending my copy back at home. And in my mind, you already know your prison call is being recorded, even though you're recording that shit, but you'll never use it for me talking to my family, telling them how I'm being treated. If I told your ass I was plotting on stabbing an officer, or my ass was having a drug shipment come in, oh bitch, you'll use that shit too. You'll be pulling them calls. That's the fuckery of it all. So I would sit here, and my mother had started camping out at DOC's headquarters in Trenton. And even when she finally got her, she never got hurt until one day she got real sick and went into a seizure and stuff there. A couple of days later, she came back on her quest. And now they want to pay attention to her. And when she started speaking to a couple of people, their responses were the same as administrators were. No, this can't be an X, Y, and Z. That can't be. We'll look into it. And like she presented my papers, not copies of the physical remedies. Um, and so ultimately, I had gotten it was uncomfortable, but I enjoyed it. Like when I enjoyed it for my own safety, when we became on lockdown and stuff like that, I would still be escorted to the housing lieutenant's office. They would have my mother already on the phone, and I couldn't touch it. We'll be on speaker just for me to go ahead and talk with you, and give you a code that only she and I know for safety reasons since I've been a teenager. So you know that I'm actually safe, and what they're telling you this go round is true. But I realized a lot of other people didn't have that, and now in New Jersey they don't have that process no more. I don't know if it's because of COVID. Some of the facilities started it before we ever even knew COVID existed. So some of these situations started in 2019. No, I'm gonna say about like 2018. What they want you to do now is the kiosk machines. They want their asses to write up any situation on the kiosk. So now, what you doing it that way? Only way, if I'm inside here and and Jasmine's my sister, bitch, and I'm sitting here reaching out to her. I have no proof to give her. So all she can go off of to defend on my behalf as being outside, defending for her, protecting, fighting from the outside for her sister. Inside, all she has is my word of mouth, right? Whereas I don't have nothing no longer for me to be able to keep my copies. I don't even physically have a copy in my cell, in my paperwork or anything else either, because at any given point in time, just as well as the inside people, their music, their downloadable photos and their videos and stuff can be deleted at any given point in time, and they wouldn't even know it.
That's really interesting, Jennifer. If I could just
So
like,
right now you have an inside person in Jersey, you have no proof of, let's say, even if it's sitting here and saying that officer Sky, he has been repeatedly harassing me or assaulting me. Okay, you just shipped me the fuck out. Now he's over here doing some overtime. I just got transferred here. It's day one. You mean to tell me on day one I started with him? I'm at a whole new facility. I'm in the damn hole. How the hell? But it's still not gonna. I have no proof, and you already know even when it comes to police on the outside, you can sit here and go to that internal affairs building to make a complaint about a police officer, and that's bullshit. You'll sit here and see like Derek Chauvin, for example. You've seen that we know now that this motherfucker had a lengthy record of multiple complaints. What are y'all doing about that? Nothing. And in these situations, it's fucked. And a lot of facilities now that everybody is. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just
No.
we just got to get started. But I think one thing that I'm really hearing from you that's actually really important and really goes to what we're talking about is that the grievances have like kind of a dual purpose. So what the grievances are supposed to be about is you having like a right to petition, which is your right to express who, like, your concerns that you have and what's going on, and like your ability to access the courts. This is part of your rights under the Sixth Amendment. You have a right to petition grievances. It's also your right under the First Amendment to express yourself and to petition to the government. But as you were expressing, Jennifer, that right doesn't really look like you actually being able to say what's going on with you and, get a solution to your problem, whether it's a safety issue, whether it's a medical care issue, whether it's a conditions issue, or whether it's things like not being able to access programs that you need. And one thing that I want to kind of highlight is that, of course, like in our abolitionist work, we're talking about this in the prison context. But this actually applies to a lot of things, like if you are denied Social Security benefits, for example, you can't sue in a court the Social Security agency. You actually have to go through the Social Security agency's process for dealing with these kinds of administrative issues and appeals before you're able to go to a court. So it kind of is part of the structure of government that we have that, like, because administrative agencies are tasked with enforcing and implementing laws, they kind of get the first say on like what it looks like to implement the law, and courts allow them to do that and to take that first initiative. And one of the things that's really interesting is, so basically, as I was saying, generally you have to exhaust available administrative remedies to sue the federal government. And particularly like any federal government agency. This is usually in situations where there's a law that has administrative appeals. So we'll talk a little bit about the law that requires you to go through administrative appeals in the prison context, but it applies to a whole bunch of agencies. As I said, Social Security, Department of Health, if you have a health insurance related issue, Department of Housing, if you have a housing related issue. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there are other areas where these questions are relevant. So the law in particular that we deal with in the context of incarceration is called the Prison Litigation Reform Act. I think it's a horrible name. Basically, to give the background, for a long time, incarcerated folks really didn't access the courts. They weren't successful in getting their rights through the courts up until the 1960s. And then all of a sudden in the 1960s, there were a whole bunch of court cases brought by incarcerated folks that actually were very successful because the civil rights movement was happening. People were generally becoming educated about their rights and learning about what they were able to do and how they were able to access the courts and learning about the Constitution. And there was a big jailhouse lawyer movement. A lot of our major court decisions come from that time period, like Estelle v. Gamble, which establishes incarcerated folks' right to medical care, and several cases establishing incarcerated folks' right to be free from excessive force and all of this other stuff was raised by incarcerated folks on their own behalf. So of course, the US government being what it is, in the 1990s, a bunch of Republican politicians got together and were like, we hate this. It's bad that incarcerated folks are getting their needs met sometimes, like not even all the time, but sometimes at least. But even that was unacceptable. So there was a narrative created basically that like incarcerated folks were abusing the system of the courts and kind of trying to make an end run around the processes that already existed within prisons to kind of get their rights vindicated by the courts directly. And what I mean when I say, getting their rights vindicated is basically like a court saying to the prison, like, you have to do this, instead of the prison like deciding to do it of its own accord. So a law was passed called the Prison Litigation Reform Act. And it basically imposed a huge number of requirements on incarcerated folks to make it so that it was much more difficult for them to go through the courts. And this is actually the real reason that we have to deal with the administrative grievance process, because if it were possible to not appeal to the actual prison staff, as both Jasmine and Jennifer were highlighting before, people would take it. The reason that people went to the courts in the first place is that the judge is not involved in the day-to-day goings-on. They're a bit more impartial. I say a bit more impartial, of course, because they still have, a collection of biases, whether it's racism or transphobia or, classism. But, at least they're out of the day-to-day chaos of like what's going on in the prison. So at least they don't feel emotionally invested in the outcome to a certain extent. But unfortunately, under the PLRA, folks are required to go through the grievance process, and there are a few other requirements. One of them has to do with something called informa pauperis. So basically, when you sue in court, you have to pay filing fees, you have to like serve things to other parties, and you have to like pay someone to do that and all this other kind of stuff. And if you are a person who can't afford that, you can apply to the court to file informa pauperis. But the problem is that for incarcerated folks, that right has actually been removed by the Prison Litigation Reform Act to a certain extent. So basically, incarcerated folks do have to pay filing fees, but they pay them in installments, and they don't have to pay all of it. It's kind of a weird system of calculation, but basically, like, the amount of the filing fee, usually it's like a couple of $100, let's say $300, is like split up over 6 months, and they take like a cut of how much people get into their trust accounts, like a 20% cut every month for 6 months. And then if that's the whole filing fee, then you're done. And if not, they just forgive the rest. So there's kind of a small amount, but it's kind of up to luck, and it's very confusing. Another element that the PLRA imposes is screening of civil actions. So folks who are familiar with these issues might have heard that like there's sort of a 3 strikes rule for suing prisons, where if you lose your case 2 times, after the 3rd time, you can't ever do it again. Another really horrible requirement has to do with physical injury. So if something happens and someone does something wrong, you have to prove that you were physically injured, rather than just being able to say, totally validly, like, I was emotionally injured, I was psychologically injured, like, I missed out on an opportunity. And the biggest requirement, and the one that we'll be talking about basically for the rest of the session, is administrative exhaustion. So again, just to kind of give a simple definition, what that means is that if you have an issue, in this case with a prison or a jail or an immigration detention facility, you have to address your problem first to the fullest extent that you can within that facility. One thing that we have to ask is like, are these requirements actually practically required in all situations? Because one of the things that the law says is that you have to exhaust your available administrative remedies. So, kind of orienting to what folks were saying earlier, if you know that nobody's going to respond to your demand, if you know that the person who you're complaining to is the person who the complaint is about, or their friend, or their supervisor, or their shift mate, or got like a family member, if you're pretty sure that you are not going to get the outcome that you need, or it's an emergency and you need to apply to a court for something to be done right away, do you actually have to go through these requirements? The answer is sort of no. So basically, you have to exhaust your available administrative remedies. So that means technically that, like, if you do go to court, which we'll talk about in a future session what that process looks like, if you do go to court, you actually can argue to them that administrative remedies were not available to you. Usually that means either arguing that it was like futile, or that it was an emergency, or certain other extenuating circumstances, like it's something that the grievance system actually couldn't address, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But the problem is, of course, that it's up to the court, and as Jennifer was pointing out, a lot of this has to do with what you can prove, and having the paperwork to actually prove something and having it be true are two different things. Another issue is that grievance procedures vary by state, so I'll email around the slides later, and I also in the link in the email, the set of links in the email that I sent around had some of these, but basically just to give you an idea, there are many different grievance procedures and they involve different things. Technically, these are supposed to be available to all incarcerated folks, though oftentimes that's not the case. You can track them down over the internet most of the time, so if you know someone on the inside who isn't able to figure out how to do it in their own system, you can ask me or try and Google it, and usually you can find it. Generally, there are 2 steps to the administrative grievance process, sometimes 3 or 4, as you can see. So the first step that some states require and some states don't is an informal request. Sometimes this is the same thing as just talking to the person who you have the issue with, or like who, just like mentioning it to a corrections officer. Sometimes this actually involves filling out a form. And as Jennifer was highlighting before, like having physical copies of things is very helpful to people because it provides evidence. So to the extent that you can go through a process of like making there be physical records, that's really important. So yeah, informal requests, sometimes they're required, sometimes not. Generally, it's advisable that you make some kind of informal request, even if it's just talking to a corrections officer or like a staff member who like may be a little more sympathetic, if only because they might tell you something that they won't tell you when there's a paper trail. And then for the actual grievance process, usually this is a form you have to fill out and submit to usually one's counselor or case manager. And you should get a physical copy, except in the situation that Jennifer was describing, which is a bit horrifying. And the problem is, after you file the grievance, you also have to go through an appeal process. So usually there's a time limit. I believe in Missouri, for example, it's 14 days. So you submit your grievance, they respond back to you. You have 14 days now to appeal it, which is also within the prison system. That's not the same as actually going to court. You still have to like appeal it to like, sometimes it's a national office, sometimes there's a level that goes to like the warden, and then a level that goes to the national office. The state office. And then usually after that, if there's no response, you have the ability to go to court. But if you do get a positive response, in some situations, you might also have to file a request to implement if you technically somebody told you that you could have, the medical care that you needed or whatever it was you requested, but it didn't actually happen, then you can make like a request to implement and say like, actually, I need this to happen. So the grievance process is supposed to apply to a broad range of complaints, including policies and conditions and actions by employees, which means like staff of the administrative agency. There are also supposed to be special rules for sexual violence and other sensitive grievances, which should involve being able to submit it to the state office directly without a corrections officer at the facility reading it, or in the case of sexual violence and other things related to sexual harassment and LGBT issues, someone on the outside should be able to file the grievance for you, which is very important because I think one thing that was highlighted is that like people who are on the inside are not always able to actually use this system the way that it sounds like it can be used. And so to the extent that folks on the outside can either help by like giving folks these policies so that they know what their rights are and how they're supposed to go through the system, or actually doing it for them, that's always very important and helpful. So let's talk about like how to write a good grievance. Jasmine was kind of mentioning this before, but basically the gist of it is like you have to write out in detail what the problem was and also list all of your attempts to resolve the problem. So that includes like, I went and talked to so-and-so and asked them nicely. I went and talked to them again and asked them like a bit more. You have to show that the issue actually affects you. So in the case of incarcerated folks, where this becomes a problem is if folks are like filing a grievance on behalf of someone else. Is actually not allowed. You have to show that it's like about yourself. Some states do allow grievances to be filed by a third party. In all situations, New York, for example, allows that. Other states may vary, though, again, as I said, they are usually required, whether you can actually do this, they are usually required to do that for situations involving sexual violence. You have to ask for what you want in the grievance. It's not enough just to say, like, I need let's say you're a disabled person and you're saying like, I can't live on the second floor. You actually have to explicitly say like, please move me to the ground floor, because basically if you don't ask for it specifically, they'll say, well, we didn't know what they wanted. You also, as Jennifer was highlighting, need to keep copies of everything. Another thing is that like some states require you to specifically say this is a request for an administrative remedy, such as, for example, Louisiana. So it's very important to get a hold of the particular state's grievance policy and figure out what all is required. So this is a flowchart about administrative exhaustion, just to highlight mostly how confusing it is. But this basically is giving you an idea of like what the range of possible outcomes are when you file a grievance. So if you start here, oh good, you can see this. So if you submit a grievance, you're like, okay, I said I have a problem, I raised my issue. There is a huge range of possible outcomes. The first range of outcomes is this box here. So this will be a situation where, for example, it's disallowed. So that means the prison says like, we disagree with even like the basis for your grievance. Or they'll say we have no jurisdiction. It means like this is somebody else's problem. That's also what reassigned means. Reassigned might be like, I raised my issue with like a general corrections officer and it's a medical issue. So they're going to reassign it to medical. Redirected might be to a different facility. So let's say that you like the problem they say happened somewhere else, but you're like, no, actually it happened here. Rejected is we just disagree. We think this didn't happen. And disapproved is in some systems, they can actually say like, not only did we like disallow your thing by saying like, we don't even agree with the basis, we're saying like it's disapproved. Like we're not even gonna like hear this from you anymore. So in all of those situations, you have to appeal because obviously like you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, and there's still the appeal level where you can say like, this was disallowed for a bad reason, or, you know, they actually did have jurisdiction, or like, I was right actually. Let's say you submit a grievance and it's approved. So they say like, okay, we will allow you to move to the like mezzanine between the first floor and the second floor. So technically your grievance was approved, but you have to ask yourself the question like, am I happy with the outcome? Do I still want to try and sue them? So if you are happy with the outcome, congratulations, you're exhausted. I'm exhausted too. If you are not happy with the outcome, you have to appeal to exhaust your administrative remedies and say like, yo, the mezzanine is still not going to work. There's still 6 stairs. I'm in a wheelchair. What the heck? Another reason that they might not have your grievance go through is because there is a pending legal matter, or they say that it's under inquiry or investigation. So a pending legal matter basically means like you're already suing them about this issue. And then whether it's under inquiry or investigation, technically that it counts as like them having resolved it, but like if you never hear anything again, usually courts will deem that to mean that you did administratively exhaust, which means you can go to the court and say like, yo, what the heck, nothing is going on, like, can we please talk about my problem? What if the grievance isn't responded to in time? So usually in most systems, the prison actually has a length of time that they are allowed to take to respond to your grievance. I believe in Missouri, it's like 60 days for the first step and then 100 days for the second step. So if your grievance is not responded to in time, in some states, that counts as a full exhaustion, but that's very rare. Basically, California was the main example that I found. But in most situations, you should still try to appeal, and this is where it gets kind of difficult and a pain, because you actually have to know what the time limit is on the government to respond to you, because your time limit to appeal starts from that date. So remember, I was mentioning like for the first step in Missouri, there's 60 days, and then you have a 14-day time limit to submit your appeal after the response. And so at the end of the time limit for the government to answer you, that counts as them having responded. So then your time limit starts to move forward. And this is very confusing. I fully acknowledge that. Like, that's how the system is designed, intentionally so. So I just want to take a pause. Maybe we'll start with some general like questions for the group. We'll give 5 minutes for that, and then we'll break out into breakout groups if I can figure out how to do that. So yeah, does anyone have any questions about everything that I just said?
It was a good layout, I'll say that. I don't have any questions, but you laid it out very well.
I'm wondering if they have like these processes somewhere hidden in like the library. Like, do they even allow people to have access to like what their processes look like?
Girl, the library where? Inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, to answer your question with the official answer, Kenna, technically people are supposed to have this information. Some states officially require people to be given the actual policy, or some version of the policy, and pretty much every state is supposed to be in the law library. But as Jasmine was pointing out, like, whether people actually get to the law library and can access this information is a totally different question. Any other questions before we go to our breakout room? Thanks, Nikki. We'll see you later. What were you saying, Jennifer? Do you have a question?
No, I was just saying that stuff that when you go to any of them law libraries, them books in there is like old. When I say old, I'm looking at case laws and stuff. I'm like, well, damn. This is from like 1990. We already well into the 2000s. We in the 2010s. What good is any of this?
Yeah, exactly. That's great. So I think that orients us to what our discussion can be. I think for the discussion, one thing that I would like folks to talk about is like if folks feel comfortable continuing to share their experiences, I think that feels really great, especially in a private setting. And I'll stop recording. I will stop recording right now, actually, if I can figure out how to do that.